Okay. How would you like to proceed with respect to that? Did you want to, no. I did want to highlight that I did give all of the board members a copy of New York City's local law pursuant to your request. And I know that at some point, you may want to adopt your own law, and I know that there's also state legislation pending. I don't know if you guys are aware of that. You know, did you want to speak to that at all, or how did you want to conduct this, this session?
Do you want to shift the,
Yeah, we make, if people can make like brief, comments initially, but.
When you say break, what do you mean?
Under an hour? No, maybe like if you could keep it to like, a couple minutes or whatever, and then, and this way we could just hear, the comments, and then we could, we could ask questions.
Yeah, and before you speak, I just want to mention that, as you know, Gary, who's an owner of one of the pet shops in town, was here. He had to leave. You know his position. He's a business owner, and he feels that any law that we adopt that would require the source of pets to come from the pet shop would put him out of business. And I'm just, I'm just saying that to articulate what his position is, just so everyone knows. And we also have the mayor of Mamaroneck here, who I think has adopted a local law that prohibits pet shops in his town.
Your meetings, are they as civil as ours? What? Are your meetings as civil as ours?
Are they as spirited as ours?
Actually, to say it was a little emotional was an understatement.
And my name is.
But they are the
Oh,
best
sorry.
reality shows in the world.
Your meetings, the same thing.
You may speak.
Yes, hi. Thanks, everyone, for bringing this subject to the evening. I wanted to see if we might be able to call in Elizabeth Orrick. She's with Best Friends Animal Society. I have a phone number, so she wanted to be able to listen in to this meeting. Is there? I have the number, Paul. If there's a way
number,
to.
if you like, and just put her on speakerphone.
Yes, and she's very involved with this initiative, and we wanted her. We're a local animal rescue, as most of you know. So thank you.
Is that an 818 number?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
Yeah, and Paul, you've been speaking with Elizabeth via email, lots of back and forth, so she wanted to be able to join this meeting. She's based out in Utah, I believe. Thank you. And so, and just by way of a more formal introduction, my name is Leslie Z, and I'm with Paws Cross Animal Rescue. I'm chairman.
I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Elizabeth, this is Tim Lewis, and the Greenburgh town attorney, and I wanted to put you on speakerphone if I could, just so you could listen and participate in the discussion involving pet shops and the local law, if that's okay. Okay, and I have you on speakerphone, and you're with the town board.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
hello? It's you.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, perfect.
This was the very
Mayor, you can
first,
come up to the table.
in New York State. He initiated and believed in this ban.
No problem.
Mayor
Just
Rosenblum.
reiterate, maybe you want to introduce yourself and just say your name again for the...
Norman Rosenblum, former mayor in the village of Mamaroneck. Mayor, when the,
No, the phone, the microphone.
The microphone,
That microphone.
the microphone.
No, the phone.
The microphone on its side.
Like this.
when the law was
Elizabeth, can you
enacted.
hear?
Yes, I can hear you. I can hear whoever is close to the phone.
Okay.
Oh, good. I'll start if I can. It's very nice. Thank you very much for the opportunity, supervisor members. Very quickly, I would note that obviously the initial question, as you noted on here, is puppy mills. Puppy mills are an abomination. We learned this very quickly in the village of Mamaroneck. I really don't think it's necessary to go into and show pictures and so on. I will let the other people do that. I believe our position was one of addressing what the effect of puppy mills are and the effect. And the other one, quite honestly, is also, as an elected official, consumer protection, because that's a direct effect of these supply of the puppy mills to the stores in the village of Mamaroneck. And very quickly, I can read two paragraphs, which is the guts of what the village of Mamaroneck law is, which, by the way, was adopted by 6 other municipalities within a year, which I kept going to their boards. It shall be unlawful for any person to sell any live dog or cat in any pet store, retail business, or other commercial establishment located in the Village of Mamaroneck unless the dog or cat was obtained from an animal shelter or humane society located in the county of Westchester, or a not-for-profit rescue and humane organization registered with the New York State Department of Agriculture. For purposes of this section, a rescue and humane organization is defined as a New York State nonprofit corporation that is exempt from taxation on the Internal Revenue Code, Section 501c3, participates in early age spay, neuter of animals, complies with the state and local laws regarding the humane treatment of animals, and whose mission and practice is, in whole or in significant part, the rescue and placement of dogs and cats. Now, we also, as we discussed prior to the meeting, we had investigated other laws. The one that we were originally looking at was the New York City law, which is probably the strongest around. It got very somewhat convoluted because it may even, in fact, still be on appeal. What we did is simply address the question of supply. The history and experience that we found in our investigation is that the vast majority, and this comes under the question of consumer protection, a vast majority, or a great number, I should say, of these pets that are purchased by customers come in, and of course they are immediately adopted and become part of the family. And because of the conditions of the suppliers, these puppy mills, they end up going and spend tens of thousands of dollars because they are actually inferior animals, unfortunately, inferior in the sense of physical, not in any other way. I would note that, of course, the question is going to come up, and you will be directly asked this one, and how did we do it? New York State legislature enacted a law that allowed local municipalities to, in fact, have more stringent laws in New York State, and that's what we took it as. And that's why we restricted it strictly to the sources that we did. I would note as an aside, it does not stop an individual from going to a breeder. If you want to take that under consideration, perhaps in your law, to allow it, but the key I would note is, again, you want regulations and control of, that's why predominantly in New York State, even of a breeder, to make sure that these animals are treated properly. But will it stand up in court is the question. The law will definitely stand up in any court. It's supported, and this, by the way, is from 2016, so we'll know that. It's supported by every state and federal law. First, the U.S. Constitution allows states and localities to create their own laws regulating health, safety, and second, the Federal Animal Welfare Act explicitly permits local legislation related to animal welfare. Third, every recent federal case confirms that it is a legitimate state and local interest to protect animal welfare. That is why every recent 2015 court decision has dismissed pet store cases against similar laws in Arizona in Puppies in Love versus the City of Phoenix, Florida and Mary Lee's Lovely Pets, Inc. versus the City of Sunrise, Rhode Island in Perfect Puppy, Inc. versus City of East Providence, and New York's Pet Welfare Association versus the City of New York. And last, in 2014, New York did pass legislation authorizing local municipalities to adopt more stringent laws to regulate pet dealers and protect the pets. Basically, it's a no-brainer. The law prevents the sale of puppy mill animals, which of course cuts off the demand of puppy mills to continue breeding them. I can go on and on, but obviously you're going to get the essence of what the Village of Mamaroneck did. I would also note that in the discussion we had with our outside attorneys and so on, that one of the key things you have to keep in mind is this, under U.S. Code, Commercial Code, is not restraint of trade, which is key. If it is restraint of trade, then it probably would not stand up and challenge in the case. But what you are doing is you are not telling the pet store you have to close down. You are saying that the pets that you sell have to be from the description I gave before, registered with the New York State Department of Agriculture, and they have to be healthy. That's the key that you want to do. Again, also goes to consumer protection. At the time, I would note that there are over 123 previous locations throughout the United States, I'm giving this to you, that already passed these similar laws. And without going on and on, I can tell you that I always end up with the same comment, which is, the law certainly recognizes the abuse and unacceptable practices of puppy mills throughout the United States. It is the strongest statement possible to eliminate such practices. It is best noted by Mahatma Gandhi's quote, "The greatness of a nation and its moral progress can be judged by the way its animals are treated." Thank you very much, and I thank for the opportunity. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Excuse me. Excuse me.
Mr. Mayor.
Excuse me?
How many,
Oh, yeah, I'm
Yeah.
sorry. As a politician, I figured you didn't want me to talk.
No, it's very interesting. How many pet stores did you have?
We had one pet store, and that's how it came about in the village of Mamaroneck. Initially, there were protests and picketing and so on. Ironically, what happened, just for general background, there was an incident in Mamaroneck when a pit bull attacked a woman walking a dog and tipped her finger off, and we looked to draft local laws dealing with pit bulls. As it turns out, in New York State, you cannot have breed-specific legislation. And after that, in the investigation, we found out about, from the puppy mill stores and so on. And I can tell you, the initial investigation I did on my own, and perhaps as the previous discussion you had, without going too long and dragging it out, do yourself a favor. Go on, and it's very simple, go on Facebook and look up puppy mills or Google. It's atrocious how they handle these animals.
What happened to that pet shop after the legislation was approved?
They chose to close down. They had the opportunity to continue and do it. Again, it's not restraint of trade. We wouldn't tell them you have to close down, but they have to adhere to selling consumer protection. You're buying a product. Unfortunately, it sounds terrible, but pets are considered property under law, if I'm not mistaken. So that's why it's consumer protection.
I would just like to add that, to that point about the store not necessarily does not have to go out of business with this particular law. I read a stat from the Humane Society of the United States that more than 2,300 pet stores nationwide have signed an HSUS pledge not to sell puppies. So it is possible to have a successful pet-related business without supporting puppy mills. So it doesn't necessarily put the business out of business, or I think in the previous town hall, we had someone said, well, I want a golden doodle, I need to have an allergy dog, we have allergies at home. It does not prohibit an individual from going to a private breeder and getting that golden doodle. That still exists. All we're looking is to stop that supply chain of puppies coming from puppy mills. Responsible breeders want to make sure that their pets are going and want to meet the families where they're going. That's the difference between a responsible breeder and a puppy mill and a store.
Sure, and some of the things to keep in mind, if you don't mind me adding, again, even though it doesn't stop you going for a breeder, you also want to make sure that the breeder themselves is responsible and perhaps registered, if not with the New York State Department of Agriculture, even through some local control of your own. But I can just say that, again, it really comes down to consumer protection, but there's the emotional aspect to it. You have to remember, I would say, guessing 50% of homes have some kind of pet, if not more. I'm being very conservative. And it becomes a member of the family. And on a purely financial aspect to it, you are penalizing these people emotionally and financially. So it's just a matter, as what I noted before. I mean, what kind of society do we live in? It's bad enough nobody talks to each other. At least take care of your pets.
I was speaking to one of the animal rights activists, and they said that in some communities there's a phase-in that gives the community, an opportunity to, say, give a pet store 6 months or a certain amount of time before they would have to comply with the law. Is that something that you did, or would you support that? So this way a shop could go from, accepting, dogs and then transitioning to a different type of business that possibly could survive.
Well, it sounds very fair, but the problem when you think about that is if you have a defective dog, you don't want to give them 6 months to sell it, so something like that. But
Do you have any thoughts on
Yeah,
that?
and Elizabeth may have something to comment on that.
Subsequent to your enacting the law and this one pet shop that you had in the village going out of business, did any other pet shops open?
No, we have some pet shops, but they didn't sell, and I sell fish, stuff like that. But I would note, I went to 5 or 6 other municipalities, Rybrook, Harrison, Rye, Yorktown. They all passed similar laws. And there are over 123. This was 2015. I'd also note, I don't know specifically, I haven't a chance to read it, but states now passing, California, Ohio, New Jersey, they're all passing similar laws. Again, it's protection, and it's common sense is what you want to do. You certainly don't want to put people out of business, but if you're going to err, you have to err on the side of what society should be operating under.
Elizabeth, are you still there?
I am.
Did you want to weigh in on this topic?
I do. So yes, we always recommend a grace period for the stores to transition out of selling commercially bred animals and phase out the sales of the animals that they still have in their inventory. And I think most of the 330-plus ordinances, as well as the statewide bans that have been passed, have included that as well. And, you know, the idea is we don't want to make this punitive for the stores. We certainly don't want to see any businesses close down. We really just want to see them adopt a more humane business model and become part of the solution rather than the problem. And there's a way to do that, and organizations like Best Friends and the Humane Society of the United States, we have resources and programs that can help those stores adopt this business model. And there are thousands of stores across the country that have already done this, are already doing it. And so there's certainly a successful, viable business model precedent. And so that's what we'd like to see happen. And so the grace period is part of that, that effort to make sure that there's no punitive or detrimental effects on any existing businesses.
To that very point, if I might add, for a transition, which certainly is reasonable and something you should discuss, perhaps part of the initial law, if you have the transition period, will be some kind of warranty. Again, the consumer protection aspect to it.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Right.
And may I ask, because I watched the last hearing and I was a little confused about how many businesses would in fact be impacted by this ordinance. I was under the impression that it was only one, but I know that there were a few business owners.
I think
who
there's
spoke.
2.
I believe there may
Sorry?
be. I believe there may be 4. There were 2 that came out to the hearing. We had a very interesting hearing where we had, and it was actually broken down on one side of the room. We had a pet store owner and quite a few people wearing T-shirts in support.
Yeah.
And there was another person who got up from a local store telling us how wonderful she treats the animals and how she doesn't get them from puppy mills, and then later pled guilty to doing exactly that. So that's what we're torn with, because I had made the comment several times. I made the comment several times that by showing these pictures, these terrible pictures, it implied that that's what was going on inside stores in the town of Greenburgh.
Never.
And it turned.
Inside the store, never.
I'm not talking about you.
Don't call out from the audience, please.
Right, don't call out and don't misstate what I'm stating. I'm saying what I said. I'm stating what I said. And so while the person was speaking, I'm not playing solitaire up here. When somebody comes up and talks about how wonderful their business is, I actually pulled up the business, and I noticed that the comments were not favorable regarding this particular business. And unlike the other, so we had a dichotomy here, clear dichotomy, where pet owner after pet owner after pet owner getting up talking about how wonderful the animals are that they got from this particular pet store, and on the other hand, this other one where they were sick and they had to return, And of course, it wasn't long after that that she pled guilty, and I was actually disappointed at how small the fine was for.
Well, that's a good point.
for
Well,
the
you know, you need
offense.
some guts to the law.
Right,
with the
there
fines.
really isn't anything that really protects the animals. And let me also state that I have 2 rescue dogs myself, and I'm very, very concerned, and became even more concerned after the person who stood at the microphone and told us how wonderful they took care of the animals, clearly was not doing that. So, but we do apparently have a reputable business, and I know if I say that, some people are going to say that can't be possible because they're selling the animals from a pet store. And that's what we're facing, is how do we deal with that? I do think that the state law does provide a mechanism for us to adopt something.
Yes.
Yorktown has something that seems to allow,
They adopted our law in essence.
is yours
Presentation,
similar to
yeah.
that one? So,
I made the presentation. Yeah.
Yorktown does seem to have something that allows for a certain number of animals from a particular breeder, so that you don't have a particular breeder, I forget what the number may be.
Well, the irony is, there are breeders that will interview the people that want to buy a dog, and they'll decide if they want to sell it to them or not.
Oh, I can tell you, when I went to Pets Alive and then put paws crossed, you know, I felt like I was being interrogated before they gave me to me, and I was actually very pleased that they did that,
Right.
because you want to make sure that you're getting a good dog. And my daughter, as a matter of fact, has a puggle, and got it from a pet store, and then went to a Pets Alive, I forget, anniversary celebration or something like that, and there was another puggle there. And so I called my daughter, and all of a sudden they had 2 puggles. So they rescued one of the other puggles. So I'm very sympathetic in how do we protect the animals who can't protect themselves. And
Correct.
that's what we're trying to figure out, is how to do that.
That's a perfect analogy, because what came in you're giving a voice to the voiceless.
Right.
Well, and the fact is that responsible hobby breeders don't sell to pet stores. That can be found in the codes of ethics of basically every parent breed club of the American Kennel Club. And they just don't sell to third parties. They want to, as you just pointed out, they want to meet the person who's going to be taking care of that animal. They want to interview them in some cases. They will let you see where those animals were raised. They'll only breed once a year, and generally not until they even have the purchaser lined up. And so pet stores, contrary to anything that they might say about being sourced only from local hobby breeders, simply can't source from those kinds of breeders, because even if those breeders did want to sell to those pet stores, they don't breed often enough to supply the amount of puppies to be sold in all the pet stores that sell animals across the country. And so the stores have to rely on these commercial breeding facilities, mostly out of state, who are willing to truck animals across the country. And we heard from one of the business owners at the last hearing that that's how he receives his puppies. And so it's not a question of how well they treat the puppies once they're in the store. It's a question of where they're getting those puppies and trying to shut down the pipeline of puppy mills from out of state that are sending their animals to Greenburgh, because it is a consumer protection issue. It is certainly a humane issue. It's a taxpayer issue when you have taxpayers who are subsidizing the shelters that some of these puppies end up being surrendered to when the adopter can't afford the veterinary bills. So the reason that I asked about the stores that had testified in opposition at the last hearing is that it appeared to me that some of their businesses are located outside of Greenburgh town limits. And so I don't know if they would even be impacted by this ordinance. And so regardless of whether or not they're opposed for ethical reasons or slippery slope reasons. I think you have to focus on who actually is going to be impacted by this ordinance and address that store or those stores, if there's more than one, directly, and kind of filter out what you're hearing from business owners who might not be impacted at all.
Yeah, another point, this discussion keeps coming up. You bring up a valid point there, because the initial goal, again, is to eliminate the puppy mills. It's just atrocious and abomination. Some of the comments that you will get from, look, this is almost like a divorce. There's his side, there's her side, then there's the truth. And the reality is that there will be comments made that, well, there is protection to U.S. Department of Agriculture and so on because they investigate. The reality is that there are so few personnel to be able to investigate this that I would say the vast majority, and I'm guessing, but the vast majority of dogs are not, quote, puppy mills, whatever they want to call them, are not truly investigated and upholding to the regulations.
Is there any?
They're not, and there was a Washington Post article just a couple of days ago, August 22nd, that did a very, very comprehensive deep dive into the challenges that the USDA is facing and why they're having such attrition with their staff, their veterinarians, their inspectors, because their hands are being tied in terms of how many inspections they can do, whether or not they can cite violators of the Animal Welfare Act. They're down to about 100 inspectors for 10,000 licensees. And even when they do see violations, they are being told not to document those violations. And with the USDA having removed public access to their inspection report database, now pet stores who are selling animals from commercial breeders licensed by the USDA, they have to do FOIA requests in order to find out if the breeder they are purchasing puppies from has had animal cruelty violations, if they have had any kind of animal welfare violations. And so those reports can take months, even a year, and when they arrive, they're almost completely redacted. So even the pet stores have no way of knowing where the puppies that they are selling are coming from, or the conditions under which they're being bred, or whether or not those breeders have violations. So if they don't know, then the consumers are not going to know. And so it really does come back down to a consumer protection issue. And, regardless of how well the puppies are treated once they arrive in the stores, that's not the issue. The issue is where they're coming from and how much that substandard breeding is going to impact the health of that puppy and what that's going to mean for the person who's bringing that puppy into the home.
Ask a question, to the town board. We all know the issue and why people are supportive, and Councilman Sheehan mentioned that the concern. On the other hand, the concern is the business, the existing businesses enforcing possibly businesses out, and then we heard that there's an option which is like a phase in, or starting it later. Are there any other concerns that the board members have relating to this issue that might make you reluctant to vote for it?
The only thing that I want to make sure to tailor it to is that it doesn't duplicate anything in the New York State laws that may. But I am all for, I too, I just lost a dog that we rescued. Fortunately, she lived a long time, but she had papers that were from some unrecognizable licensing organization. It was just all phony baloney. But,
so would the consensus of the board be to put this up for a public hearing, to put a proposed law for a public hearing, and to have like the 6-month,
transitional kind of?
And maybe a transition, maybe we could, ask, your organizations to work with existing, pet stores, so hopefully they could come up with a model that could be, successful. let me ask a question, let's say a group like Paws Cross, not to put you on the spot. So let's say you have, a pet store, they would be able to sell pets from Paws Cross, right?
I've read about examples where some of these pet stores that are moved away from puppy mills have a certain number of dogs and cats that are from local shelters or rescues. I'm not necessarily committing that would be from Paws Cross in this example. I would have to defer to the other members of our leadership, but I've read other models. There's thousands of pet stores who have made this shift, and they are showing and having adoptions for animals. 30% of the dogs in America are in shelters today. There's certainly enough supply. There's a lot of supply.
So I'm just wondering in terms of, getting to the next step where we're not really forcing them, out of business. If let's say we could reach out to all the shelters in the, in the area. Is this a bad idea or a good idea?
No, I just wanted to.
Did you want to come up? Because you got to be.
You have to come up to the table and talk
Speak
into
to
the
the
microphone.
And Ellen, as she's coming up,
Because I
has the
sort of
county
feel-
addressed this issue or sought to address it?
Well, the county had several years ago, and then there was supposed to be legislation. I spoke to Jim Maisano, who is now in consumer protection, but he said that there was legislation pending in New York State that would have overridden any legislation, so they stopped that. I also spoke to Margaret Kunzio, who's a very, as you know, big, and she, unfortunately, these last couple of weeks, because it's very quiet and people are away, she told me that she would get me a lot of information that she has accumulated. So I thought that could be helpful, and yeah.
Hi, okay, so I actually
I think the bill
addressed,
that you're talking about, which is the statewide bill that replicates what happened in California and Maryland, it didn't make it through the legislature before they recessed. So we're assuming and hoping that will be brought back in the next session, but there's no guarantee that it will pass, even if it is brought back.
That's true, although with this legislature, there's a greater likelihood. But, yeah, so I think that was the only reason that the county was holding off, only because it would be superseded. So why, there are so many other things on their plate. They decided they'd hold fire for that reason. But they are great supporters of legislation.
okay, so I actually addressed it in the short thing that I wrote down. So do you prefer I'll read it, or I'll just address it now and then I'll...
Why don't you read it, and then if you have...
Okay.
If you have
All right, so dear board members, my name is Anat, and I'm a volunteer at the New Rochelle Humane Society, and I've been volunteering in shelters for the last 20 years. The number one problem we have is an overpopulation of dogs and cats. There are two reasons for that. Dogs and cats who are producing puppies, and breeders who fuel overpopulation. The crazy reality is that that they keep breeding dogs while we're putting to sleep 2 million dogs and cats every year. Let me repeat this number. We put to sleep 2 million dogs and cats every year. When you adopt a pet from a shelter, the pet has to be fixed. When you buy a dog at a store, it is not an issue. Spaying and neutering makes a big difference. Just one unaltered female dog and her offspring can produce 67,000 puppies in only 6 years. In 7 years, one female cat and her offspring can produce an incredible 370,000 kittens. So not only when you buy a dog from store or breeder, you send a dog to die, you also create a huge problem with potential for thousands of puppies and kittens. Nobody who came to present the store owners last time can pretend to love animals, because every time you sell a dog or a cat and every time you order a dog from a breeder, you send others to die. As simple as that. There is not any nice way to go around it. To take a dog and make her into a breeding machine is nothing but a pure abuse. This is unacceptable in 2019. The store owners were standing and talking about people who want pure breeds, again in the last session. Our shelters and rescue dogs have any possible kind of breed. If someone wants a particular breed, they can very easily put that breed name with the word rescue next to it in Google search and find that breed. They can also find them on their adoption websites, or will find them any kind of breed they would like. It's important to know the dogs who came from breeders have severe health issues or defects, and many end up being abandoned on the street or dumped at the shelters. I see it all the time. Inbreeding causes painful and life-threatening genetics defects in purebred dogs and cats, including crippling, hip dysplasia, blindness, deaf, heart defects, skin problems, epilepsy, and breeding problems. As a society, we must do the right thing. Breeding dogs while we putting million dogs and cats to sleep is not acceptable. Your board members stated last time that some of you adopted your dogs from a shelter. Imagine your dog being put down to sleep. Because this happens to millions of dogs every year as we allow breeders to keep producing more and more dogs and cats. Because of that, and because it is not acceptable in 2019, many states have changed the laws. Here's a list of places that have legislation banning pet stores and breeding operations. Places in Westchester that passed similar legislation: Mamaroneck, Mount Pleasant, Rybrook, Yorktown, and Portchester. Other places, New Jersey at 125 locations, 64 locations in Florida, Colorado, Indiana, Maine, Maryland, Massachusetts, Michigan, Minnesota, Nevada, Georgia, Illinois, New Mexico, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Rhode Island, Tennessee, Texas, Utah, Washington, Wyoming, and Canada. As for the store owners, I think they can be smart about it and grow from it. That's what successful business do. They work with changes in the market. Their biggest competitor, which is Petco, is giving space for rescue groups to come for adoption days. Every weekend they do that. They win the adopter's heart and business. People like me would never step in stores that sells pets as long as they're responsible for putting dogs and cats to sleep and for overpopulation. Therefore, what may seem to them as loss can bring them more sustainable business in the long run if they're going to be smart about it. Again, board members, I hope you're going to do the only ethical thing and vote no on pet sales and vote yes for adoption of shelters and rescue pets. Thank you.
You know, I'm sort of wondering if some of the shelters, like Paws Croix and New Rochelle, could maybe, before we have the public hearing, reach out to some of the pet stores, the existing ones, and see if you could work out something where, because that could be like a good model where, if they replace the dogs they're currently selling with and have an arrangement with a group like Paws Croix, I would think that would be, then there's really no issue, because, why put the Paws Croix doesn't put animals to sleep, but the other ones do, and this is a way of actually, it could be a win-win for everybody.
Each one of these laws talk about that they can sell animals from a shelter. How does that work?
Well, I would like to make a comment on that. Similar to how you were saying before that breeders want to interview the potential owners, as you know, Paws Cross also does that. And whenever we pull an animal, they are our responsibility. We love them like they're our own. And we would not feel comfortable placing that responsibility with somebody else. And I think Best Friends is very well equipped, the Humane Society of the United States, to offer resources and business models that they can use. And we would be more than happy to connect them with other 501c3 organizations that would be able to help them find some rescue animals. But
I'm saying if it's not Paws Croix, there's other shelter. Paws Croix is the only no-kill shelter. There are kill shelters, in Westchester.
Yeah,
So
there are other no-kill. We are the only true no-kill, but there are other no-kills as
Right.
well. But there are municipal shelters and in Westchester that do euthanize.
What if, would you be willing to train, say, staffers at
Absolutely.
say,
We will provide any resource that we can to help them.
no, but let's say there's a pet store that's been here for 20 years, and, they're like devastated because they feel that, they could go out of business. On the other hand, you have your own criteria. Is there a possibility that we could figure out a way where we could say to them, there's an alternative. You could, take the pets from the shelters, agree that there would be an interview process, and it would meet with the standards. You could maybe help monitor it. Then I feel that this would be like, almost like a slam dunk, and then it becomes like then there's really no controversy, and, when you're.
I'm sorry, I have to just interrupt.
You got to come to the table and speak into the microphone.
Hi. My name is Leslie Hirshorn, and I too have been involved with the rescue for over 20 years. The problem with what you're trying to put in place is it's a conflict of interest because pet stores are retail, and they are in the business of making profit. Rescue groups are in the interest of ethics and saving. It's about humanity, it's about a culture, it's about a philosophy. So I don't see the two blending that easily. I see what you're saying, but if they are going to take the move in the right direction and start to adopt similar practices that we have in rescues, we would be in 100% support of that and offer them any help that we could.
Let me ask a question. If we're talking, because, the goal, if your goal is not for only Greenburgh to adopt the legislation, but for other communities
Absolutely.
all over the country to
Correct.
adopt it.
Absolutely.
So, and obviously, the state legislators, there were some legislators who said, oh, we're for it, but it didn't pass. So, it didn't pass because there's people who were lobbying against it. There's other communities, most communities in the country don't have the law. So if we could come up in Greenburgh with a model that could work and persuade other communities, that makes it easy for every other community to adopt this. You may not get everything you want, but by and large, we're going to be better off because we're going to be putting an end to the, puppy mills, and also putting an end to the fact that there are shelters that are killing. So one of the thoughts, and I'm just thinking out loud, one of the thoughts I had is, let's say we say there's a 6-month, transition. Let's say we said for 1 year, I'm throwing out something, we would let, we would let the current businesses after that, try out, selling puppies from, only from shelters, but there would be, monitoring, and at the end of the year, the town board, we would have a sunset, clause, then the town board would have to, re-vote, the legislation. This way we could give it's sort of like a little bit of a compromise, where we could give the concept a chance. We can monitor, everybody would see if it works or if it doesn't work. If it doesn't work, then we could.
What would be the incentive for the pet stores to make it work after those 6 months?
No,
Because then if they don't want it to continue.
Then the legislation would, then we would have, the town board could say, we're going to adopt another law.
And then what happens with all the dogs that have multiplied and the cats that have multiplied?
No, I'm talking about.
So let me just, so you're saying for 6 months, they continue what they're doing as a transition period?
No, what I'm thinking is, they would have a 6-month period to have a transit.
Yeah.
My goal is, I'm trying to say, we've been talking about this for like a year, and so far
Yeah.
nothing's happened. So my goal is to see, what can we do to have the legislation pass and the majority of people, have a comfort level. So when we have the hearing, we come up being like very, very reasonable, and I'm saying give 6 months, and then after that have like, say, a 1 year, period where they could only sell from shelters. But the shelters would work, during the first 6 months, they would work with, with the businesses and come up with a model where they're teaching them how to interview people and all that. You could then come up with your own monitoring, program or whatever, and then we would see if it works, and if it doesn't work, then the following year, we could come up with something a little, that would be stronger. It may work, it may not.
It certainly makes sense, because again, you go back legally, you're going to have to look at that. It's not a restraint of trade. What you're doing, I think that you initially said, is a transition period. So you passed the law in the first 6 months or 1 year, whatever it is. you're getting rid of existing stock. You're not allowing them to go to puppy mills and get more.
Right.
What you're doing, while they're doing the transition of getting rid of their existing stock, I hate to use the word stock, for the puppies, but the puppies that they own, with, of course, something, with a codicil, they have to give some kind of warranty, because that's the problem in the beginning. But also, I think it's win-win, because I think your association and other associations, you don't want to have these rescue dogs there forever. You want to, if not only give them to people that come to you, maybe the number is so large that's out there, the rescue, that they can turn around and say, well, we'll make a deal with a local store and we'll sell them a little less, because instead of having someone adopt one or two, you can now have a legitimate, controlled pet store selling these source dogs from the rescue centers, maybe 5 or 10 or 15 at a time.
And I remember when I first got involved in politics as a county legislator, I worked with Mimi Stone. And, she was the head of the Elmsford Animal Shelter, which was, before. And I remember the county kept trying to shut down the animal shelter because there were violations and there were so many pets and all that. And I remember once, and I'll never forget, I got everybody, I organized an effort where people called the legislators, and we had like thousands of calls, and then they referred all the calls to me because they were angry at me, the legislature. But I remember, and that was like in the 80s. And, the county at that time really wanted to shut down the shelter. I know that there's a lot of pets that other shelters put to sleep. We want to stop that also.
Which they do only because of overpopulation.
Right,
Shelters do not wish to put animals to sleep.
To the newer shells, if now, all of a sudden, if I say to, one of the pet stores here, and I say to the newer shell, shelter, you know what? We now have another, it doesn't have to be postcard, we have another source. They could get their pets from New Rochelle, instead of putting a beautiful dog to sleep for no reason, let that person.
Excuse me, Paul, can I just add
Yeah.
one point
Yeah.
to this? Because, of course, we can go round and round, and I think we're all on the same page about what's ethical.
Right.
Except, it's okay, except for the pet store owners that really, they are in it for profits. They're not in it for the love of animals or to share, information about breeding. They're in it for profit. And once that's their main thing, I just don't see it. It's
Yeah,
a
but the
conflict.
question
But
I have.
I just want you to know one thing. I work with a rescue group called SNAR, Special Needs Animal Rescue and Rehabilitation. I'm sure you all remember the story of the pet stores that got shut down in Mayapack and in Connecticut.
And Mamaroneck, it's the same one.
Yes, and you know what? The dogs that were the throwaways, that were not sellable, were in that guy's basement, and SNAR paid to rescue those animals. That guy would have thrown them in the garbage. He was not interested in working with rehabbing or rescue.
No, but let me ask a question, because, right now, New Rochelle is probably putting to sleep pets. They're doing it they do it a lot. There's, the reason Paws Cross is so successful is because the pets are, you're not taking every single pet, pet around, so they're living comfortably, it's not overcrowded, the shelter, but there are pets in Westchester right now, there are animals in Westchester right now who are being put to sleep. So the question is, if we have a choice of right now, if it comes down to putting a pet to sleep or giving the, a store the option of selling that, I would rather see the pet not put to sleep. I've always been against all the kill shelters. And I'm just.
But again, the kill shelters is not the problem. We have to look at the bigger picture, because you're talking about now one dog compared to one dog. I just gave numbers about, a pet store, they don't care about the animals. It's a business. They sell animals, they don't require you to fix them.
I think we're preaching to the choir, really.
Right.
And I think we're all on the same page, and I think it's a good idea to look at the other legislation out there.
Yes.
and craft something, and then, you know, have your input on that
Right, and I just
legislation.
wanted
I want
to,
to address the nuts and bolts for a minute. First of all, as far as giving the
Kylie-
phase-in, aren't I yelling enough? I thought I was. First of all, Elizabeth, can you hear everyone? Is she still there?
Yes, I can hear you. There's noise being moved around.
Yes, that was me, sorry.
But I can hear you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. As far as the phase-in period, I've looked in, as you all know, I'm an animal advocate for many breeds of animals, many types of animals. The phase-in period is not uncommon when it comes to animal issues. They did that with the elephants, which are now banned in New York State. There was a phase-in period. And the circuses, which have been banned in New York City, and actually everything around us, all had a phase-in period. The circuses in New York City had, like, I think it was like a 3-year phase-in period. So that's fine. On the other hand, as far as what you discussed, Paul, which is this, you know, okay, we phase them in for 6 months, they continue as business as is, and then we monitor them. That's not working.
It's not monitoring, it's basically just saying they can't sell any pets from any organization
Absolutely.
other than a shelter.
But it has to be written, is what I'm saying.
It would only be from, you know, and we would list the shelters that we would find, you know, acceptable.
so if I can make again a clarification, because I think the Petco model works well, and Petco is all over, they don't sell PetSmart. They don't sell the animals, they just give the space, and the rescue groups come there, use their space on that day. The adoptions actually go through the rescue, which I think is a much better, because really in rescue, we really do checkups. Like you said, sometimes it's even tough, because we want to make sure they're going to the right families, and there's a good match. So they don't directly sell, but they sell everything else.
Yeah, but the thing, what
Because if they sell, then again, we have an issue, because they don't do ethical stuff, and they don't really care, and they just want to
The
sell.
only thing that I'm saying is that, you know, I'm trying to figure out a way of balancing, you know, the businesses with needs, with, you know, with the humanitarian concerns. And I've been an advocate for, you know, I'm a vegetarian. I basically have always supported the Elmstead Animal Shelter, Paws Crows. I've always been, you know, we were the first community in the state to ban circus.
Yes, you were.
Elephants. You know, the circuit, so I feel very strongly about this, but I also am trying to figure out what can we do, not only to do something for the town, but to make this so easy that every community in the country will make, we're giving them a gift where it makes it impossible for anybody to say no. And I sort of feel that sometimes if you compromise a little bit, you may be able to get many more we could get everybody to do this.
So I think that Best Friends and Humane Society have been very, very successful with this model, and it already exists, and I know that she has already said today that she's willing to share that with the local stores here as well, and I think that could set a perfect example for other communities as well, because it's proven time and time again in thousands of stores across the country that it works and it can be a successful business model for them.
Yeah.
So when do you think we would be ready to come up with a proposal, and when would we be able to schedule a public hearing?
Well, we have a law that's already been drafted. I just have to circulate it to the town board. You may want to change that and make modifications. It does not include a phase-in, if that's something that the board is interested in.
But
So I
that
can
also
circulate
includes that they could sell animals from a shelter, and it seems like that's not really, we could put it in the law, but that's really not what you want. But every law that's been presented to us has that in there, but it seems like we're making a false representation
I would defer
to
to
the pet
Best
stores.
Friends on that, if you want to have her speak on that. What the-
Absolutely, and Elizabeth did speak on, you're there still, right, Elizabeth?
I am,
Yeah.
and I can make a recommendation about this. So we've worked on most of the 330-plus ordinances that have been enacted so far. So there's, you don't need to reinvent the wheel. There's been a lot of these ordinances already enacted, 2 statewide bills we worked on, as well as other, you know, national nonprofit organizations. So what I would recommend is that provide model language, we can provide a model ordinance for you, but what I would recommend is rather than allowing the stores to sell shelter animals, which frankly, they're probably not going to be equipped to do even logistically, because I have not been in any of those stores, but if they are like nearly every other puppy store across the country, they have very small cages that are designed to house 8 to 12-week-old puppies, not the variety of sizes and ages of animals that you find in the shelter. So I don't know if they could even house those kinds of animals if they were incentivized to do so. So what I would recommend is that the stores can display adoptable animals in cooperation with an animal care facility or an animal rescue organization. That's the Petco model that was just mentioned earlier, which is obviously very successful. It's the model that most of the pet stores across the country that don't sell animals are already doing. That is a very profitable model because it drives a lot of traffic into the stores. Adopters of those animals tend to be very loyal to the stores where they found that animal. They come back for their food and their supplies. In the meanwhile, implement a generous, reasonable grace period for the stores to phase out the sales of those animals. Help them shift their model to other revenue streams such as selling supplies and grooming and products and anything else that they're equipped and willing to take on. And then you don't need to worry about things like, them getting animals from shelters or a sunset period or any of those things. And you can also look at, New Jersey has passed over 130 of these ordinances, and they're basically all the same, and they basically all include that same language. So I think rather than staff investing a lot of time and energy and resources, which you probably would rather spend on other things, that we just work together to come up with something that's fair and reasonable and effective and has some teeth and doesn't have loopholes and is going to support the store, not penalize the store, but also do what you're intending to do, which is to prevent out-of-state milled animals from coming into your community.
So the New Jersey laws do not have that provision which says that the stores can sell animals as long as they're from a shelter? Is that what you're saying?
Well, they say that they can't sell, deliver, offer for sale, auction, otherwise dispose of animals, but may offer for adoption only those dogs and cats that Pet Store has obtained from or displays in cooperation from an animal care facility. So technically, they could sell shelter animals, but honestly, that's really hard to do unless you really know what you're doing, and it's so much easier and more profitable for them to just allow space for rescue groups to come in, and then the group is responsible for the vetting of those adoptions. They're responsible for maintaining those animals at the end of the day. It's just a much easier model for the stores to implement.
And
How is it more profitable for that store if they're not the one actually selling it? They're just making the space available.
Sorry, did you say how is it profitable? I didn't hear the
Right, you
beginning.
said it's more profitable with that model, so I'm wondering how is it more profitable? Because I know we're going to have a bunch of people coming to our public hearing asking, why are you shutting me down? And it'd be nice to have answers, because every law that we were shown had that caveat in there that they could sell it if they obtained it from a shelter, but now that we're getting ready to adopt something, it turns out that getting animals from a shelter may not be realistic.
Can you provide us with the statistics that show that it is more profitable? Do you have that information on hand?
I mean, it's not statistics per se, but we certainly have stores that have attested to the fact that since they transitioned to an adoption model, that their business has increased. So yes, I can definitely provide that, but nobody's done sort of, a national survey to,
Well, even some,
garner that data.
even some backup, I think, would be.
Even if you think, I don't know, how much a puppy cost, $1,000, let's say, so now the store, let's say somebody went to a store, he bought, very simple math, he bought a puppy had problems, he'll never come back to this store. He will not buy anything else from the store versus I adopted my cats, again, from a rescue group who came to the store, and ever since, I buy all the equipment. And that's really where the money comes, the long run, the food, the equipment, all that stuff.
But
And
this
that's
is
long-term.
anecdotal. This is anecdotal, and well, I believe you, it is anecdotal, but we're all on the same page as you. I think what Francis is referring to is the pet shop owners we're telling to transition, so we have to give them a reason to transition.
You know, all
Right.
of the
I mean-
animal exploitation businesses are on the decline. That's fact. That's the overview of this, but it's fact. I mentioned the circuses before. Circuses are on the way out completely. Who would ever think Clyde Beatty Circus is closed down completely? The carriage horse industry is under, they're just going. They put them now only into Central Park. The owners, of course, they raised a terrible fuss. People understand now from the animal's point of view. It's not like 50 years ago. People understand, they have compassion, and all of this animal exploitation businesses, I would say the pet shops, jeepers, 10 years tops, they're just gone completely. So I'm putting that out there again, oh my God, the pet shops, oh my God, the pet shops. And yeah, you're the town council, whatnot, this is and it's one of the businesses, as I mentioned to one of my associates here, what if New York State legalizes brothels? You're gonna put a brothel into the store so that there'll be a business going on and it's legal?
I don't think that I'm saying that,
No,
Kylie.
no.
Well,
I
I'm
think
saying-
it's just moving away from the sale and into the adoption of the ones that really need homes,
is fine, too,
and
but you're
stopping
not
the
concerned about-
pipeline of puppy mills. Of course, they have to be. That's part of the conversation. And you'll see businesses that are smaller, not as big as PetSmart and Petco, like Pet Value, who have come into the community recently and started up a fantastic business by having rescue groups like ours, yours. We all go to those stores on a rotation and adopt our animals out of their locations. And they have a ton of other services, whether it's grooming, having their own baths, food. So there's proven models that show
Right.
that it can be successful, and if they are willing to adjust to those models, and that they have laid out.
Yeah,
I
well, you
think
don't have to sell
yeah.
us on that.
Yeah,
It's-
yeah, I
it's
think
we
it's-
just,
And I think
we
that's
have to
how
be a
to-
little sensitive to people
Yeah.
who are in business who maybe,
And I think
Think or-
the transition period is reasonable, yeah, for them to transition
Right.
to this model, and there's plenty of
Right.
organizations and groups that are willing to help them with the transition
right.
as well.
And, it just helps to say, even if it's a series of anecdotes that are proof positive.
Yeah, and I
That's all
think
I'm
I think
asking.
she can get you that
Yeah,
information.
exactly.
Yeah.
It's,
Bottom line is human life, animal life, it's not a commodity.
we're all in
Yeah.
agreement.
And they have to get up to speed on that.
We're all in
They
agreement.
have to try a different business,
Mhm.
You're talking about Googling, look up puppy mill documentaries, the stuff that you'll see on there, let them look at that and see if they still
No,
want
but
to.
I understand, but if we would have adopted, when you came here the first time, adopted the law, you recommended that we adopted.
No, wait, Mr.
Okay.
Sheehan, because what we discussed in the original, and I was the one who initiated this, and we discussed there are 7 other venues. Oh, you're not Norman. As the mayor had mentioned, you said, get me copies of those 7 other venues laws. Fine, here they are. I don't recommend, I just want a change for something good for the animals. That's all I want. I think I gave you guys a copy of the New York City law, probably the California law.
We have that.
I don't make money off of this, unlike the breeders.
No one's saying you
Well,
are.
but it's not nothing that I recommend. My only recommendation is there to be some kind of transition away from puppy mills. And the fact that you guys have right here, that they were busted while we're waiting for something to come out for the Greenburgh puppy mill. And the store was busted, where's my notes?
We know
Anyway,
that.
you know about it.
We know that. I mentioned it.
Was busted by the AG during this discussion. It's kind of pitiful. It's time that doesn't happen. And it's been an excellent explanation given to everyone here about how there's no good pet shop because they have to, in supply and demand and everything, they can't use individual breeders. They have to go to commercial puppy mills to get a large-scale number of animals, and how it does, there's no point in a private breeder cutting into his or her own profits by funneling through a pet shop. They would have to get some of the profits. There's no incentive for that. We've been over this. So, however, do something, work something out, but I don't have any, I don't want to use that expression, you know, the one about the dog in the fight, whatever. I don't, just do something that adopts a change so that these puppy mills aren't being funneled into the stores. And monitoring, you once proposed, you know, have them sign a promise letter. You know what, that's worth nothing.
Okay, so I think we get it, and I'm going to follow up with Elizabeth, by the way.
I do want, we're also propagating this problem because we keep taking dogs. Every one of my dogs is from the South, right? And matter of fact, there was video of my son's dog coming up, and there was like every 100 miles, there was like a fun drive or whatever. We're relieving that problem that's happening in the South by bringing the dogs up, which just propagates more dogs being bred in the South.
Right, but we also send a message. By doing this, we're sending message, and we see more and more places change their legislation, and I think that's important.
Well, I would just want to make a comment on that. So when we pull from down south, we're only pulling from areas that have established spay and neuter free programs in place for their community. So we are taking out of that community where they're not easily rehomed, and we are making sure that there's programs to improve that community for the animals that are there currently. So, you know, it's not the animal's fault where they're born, and we have a commitment to saving all lives, and if we can make their lives better in Georgia by helping them with some programs that are the Northeast has proven to be extremely successful, we're going to help them as well. So that's, you know, when we make sure that they have.
When they spay and neuter, our dogs were a family. I mean, I have brother and sister and.
Yeah, it's a work in progress. It doesn't happen overnight. It takes years for it to go in full effect, especially with how many are on the streets in those communities.
I know you're going to show me that again, but what you're not getting is we're well beyond
Yeah, I
that.
think
We're trying to work through the
Agree on that,
legislation.
because it sounds like it's still saying, well, there's
No,
some
no,
good
no.
ones.
No, I think everyone's in agreement. I think everyone's in
We're
agreement.
well past that.
Make your comment.
My point has been is that there's a provision in almost every law that I don't want to sell anything in a local law that's not factual. If shelters are not going to provide dogs and cats to a pet store instead of what they're selling now, we should say that. But every law that I see, and I keep pulling up more and more, has that provision that it's okay, because if the goal is to reduce the number of animals that are in shelters so that they're not put to sleep, death, well, then it would seem like it makes sense to allow that to happen.
Well,
But I'm
the
hearing
goal
that
for this
there's
particular
pushback on
issue
that.
is really to stop the puppy mills producing for the purposes of pet stores making profit. What you're talking about is a different issue.
That's a totally different issue.
Yeah.
Maybe that's something.
But it's been in every law that was presented, and if we would have adopted the laws that were provided to us as examples, I'm not saying you, but that we were given as examples, you said that other municipalities in Westchester, if we would have said, you know, this is great and just adopted it, it would have been in there. And then we would have searched for shelters. And so I think that's what we have to find out, is for that particular store, is who would actually provide animals from a shelter, and
How
we'll
many
do some
stores?
research.
You said 4 in Greenburgh?
There might be as many as 4.
I mean, I think we're worried too much about those 4 stores
Well,
compared to
unless you're the
big
owner of the
picture.
stores.
No, but they have to, as we said, grow with the times. And-
So I'm going to work with Elizabeth and
Go
get
ahead. Go ahead.
appropriate law.
Comment.
Okay.
Please, go ahead.
Okay, my comment is, a couple of comments. One is, there was an article recently in the New York Times about the very question you raised about whether it's, the efficacy, I guess, of bringing dogs up from the South. And there were pros and cons. It wasn't really one side or the other. So I would just Google that because I can't remember the date of it. But it was fascinating to me about the whole idea of bringing dogs from the South, the good and the bad of it. So that's just an aside.
I'm not clear on how many pet stores you actually have. I've heard, I think, 1, 2, 3, or 4.
Right.
So I think that's important to figure out, is how, are we gonna bend over backwards to accommodate one person, or 10 stores, or what? You know, how
Well,
many
it's
stores
the
are we talking
ones,
about?
it's the one store in particular that came out who
Okay.
seems to
And
have a
as-
lot of very satisfied customers and not one person objecting, as opposed to the
Well, it's
other.
people that they bring in.
Right.
You know, it's like when you work with surgeon and have good success rate, because those who had really bad are the one who lost to follow up in research.
I would
So,
Well,
I think that maybe Best Friends can help with that idea of whether there are models of selling pets, selling shelter pets through pet stores. I don't know if that ever happens or not, but if it does, I'm sure that they can provide examples, and we can contact the places that do that. Because you said you have laws
Yeah.
that say that you're allowed to sell
I
pets
haven't
from
seen one that
shelters.
doesn't have that, that's the thing.
So why
But
don't
then
we
that,
just,
that shows that that model
contact
does
them.
work.
We can just contact them
But
and
the
see
model is that
how
they
does that
get it
work.
from shelters.
So we can see how that works from the places that do that.
Right.
I don't think we have to recreate. so
Well,
don't
again, I think we have a
recreate
path for
it.
success here.
Yes.
So I want to, and I know the board has some other commitments, so I want to, I want to give you, I want to draft something that I think you might want. So I think I'm ready to do that at this point.
So
Don't
what's
recreate
the
the wheel.
timetable?
We don't have to recreate the wheel. You've got
10
Best
days.
Friends and the Humane
Okay,
So I want to speak to
Society.
Elizabeth and
when
have a
would we-
private
when-
conversation.
We got to,
And
I have to show the board the law that,
When, like, if we want to just set like a target date, you know,
Yes,
so this way at least we know, we're not going to.
By the first of the year, let's have it.
No, I'm saying, a hearing in October?
yeah, I would say, given your current schedule, maybe the first meeting or the second meeting in October. It could be the second meeting in September, but I'll have the information to you
I think
probably
Yom
within 10
Kippur is
days.
one day, I forgot, so I know there's one meeting we're not having.
Hold on, yeah, let me check.
So within the
Right.
next 3 or 4 meetings, we'll
Yeah,
have.
I mean, I don't want to commit until the board sees the
of
law,
course.
but,
We're aware of that. We're aware of that. I know, we're aware of that. This has been going on for some, we know.
we understand, Ms. Blackton, we
can I
understand.
just make, I've been waiting and waiting. I just want to say a couple more things,
Okay.
please. I've been sitting back there listening to all of this. I want to reiterate what one of you had said. The model, that the incentive for the business is, as one of you had said, the ancillary sales. After they adopt the pet or buy it, whichever way you decide to go, it's the loyalty to that store and shopping at that store for all of the supplies. And I think to your point, I'm sorry I don't know your name.
Hi, Ellen.
If I'm a pet store owner, show me the money. Show me, there might not be hard statistics, but we do need anecdotally.
Yeah, and she'll get that.
And maybe you can have the pet stores even in on this call through Best Friends to tell how it works. But yeah, pet stores, they need,
The
They wanna
pet
know
store, the
how- what's in
gentleman
it for me.
who was here, who left, one of the owners who was here, also blatantly lied, Norman Silver blatantly lied and said the rescues
Yep.
don't give any follow-up attention,
And-
support,
We're on a different-
nothing.
Yeah.
No, because as far as giving them cred, I'm just
I
saying.
know, but I don't think it's fair to say
blatantly
to somebody after they leave that they're a liar. I
And I
mean,
think
Well,
no, it's
I
not
don't
fair.
think
I
it's,
said it to his face, Norman was here.
It's just not fair.
Keep going it.
I think.
I don't think
it's going
anybody,
away
can
from
I just say, I don't think anyone wants to disparage, I don't think it's going to be, it's not going to help move the town forward with the ordinance that they're looking for to disparage any businesses. I think everyone's on the same page as far as the problem you're trying to address. So what I would recommend is that we will send you some model language, similar to what, most of the municipalities have already enacted. We can provide some businesses that have made the transition successfully and then give you something to work with. Does that
That would be
sound?
really great.
Yeah,
When
thank
we-
you very
I have
much.
an idea.
Thank you
When
so
we
much.
have,
Thank
the- when we have a public hearing, would we be able to have some of the businesses that have made the transition successfully, maybe they could participate by phone?
We should, and we could probably have Pet Value here as well. We have a very good relationship, and PetSmart, I'm sure, representatives, I'm sure would join as well.
Or, right, even if they did like a video, we could do
a
this.
smaller
Yeah, Pet Value is smaller than PetSmart and Petco, and they've made it very successful, and they've replicated it.
Even if you had like a video that we could show at the meeting, they don't even have to call, they could just say, let's say, there's a company in California or whatever, and they could testify, and then we could show it at the board meeting.
And I can't speak for whether or not they would be able to produce that, but we will definitely do what we can to find somebody to speak on behalf of the business model that they have successfully implemented. If that means, a letter of support, whatever it is, we'll get you something so that you're not just relying on you're not just relying on me for that information. Because I understand, I totally understand where you're coming from.
Thank you for coming.
Thanks, Elizabeth.
One final
Have a
comment.
good weekend.
Thank you for your dedication. Democracy is not easy.
Thank you for
Thanks,
coming.
everybody.
So long.
So do we have a date?
We're going to do it, quickly, within like 2 weeks if you go on, and then we'll give you a better date.
My scribble, I'll get it some kind of way. I got it. Thank you, Tim. I appreciate it.
If we're going
Thank you,
over to Tally
everybody.
Hill, we should go.
Thank you, Elizabeth.
Before it
Thank you,
gets
Elizabeth.
too dark. We're not going to be able to see anything.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.